What's up, guys? Making a VR to a VR that was done to me. Well, I did a video. Juju13 did a VR. I'm doing a VR to that. It's not an argument or anything. It's just discussing knives and locks. His first point that was kind of contradicting me was he said that I said the lock would fail after pushing in the lock. I didn't say the word fail. I said that doing this repeatedly, hundreds, tens, hundreds, possibly thousands of times over the use of the knife will cause the knife to be non-functional. And by non-functional, I don't mean not lock up. I mean not function as it is designed, i.e. open the knife locks up with no play. That's a functioning frame lock to me. Frame lock that has slop and play is a non-functioning frame lock to me and most manufacturers. I mean, if they send you a frame lock and it has tons of up and down play and you message them and say, look, my lock has play, vertical play, they're not going to say, well, that's still a functioning lock because it's not going to close on you. They're going to say, the lock is non-functional, send it back and we'll replace it or do whatever they do. So that's just, you can believe whatever you, I mean, that's, if he wants to think that, that's perfectly fine. He's more entitled, not more entitled. Shit, we're both entitled to our opinions. He's entitled to his opinion. I'm entitled to mine. We're both in America, so we're both entitled. His second point about frame locks is something that, again, I disagree with. You could agree with it. Either way, it's all gravy. It's no big deal. He says that a frame lock will fail in the middle, and so will a liner lock. Or he says that a liner lock will fail in the middle before a frame lock will fail at the cutout. Really, neither of us have evidence to say if that is the case or not. Given that the cutout is the exact same thickness of the lock bar on this, I'm not sure we can determine which will fail first. I do want to point out that if a frame lock fails, it's going to crumple. It will crumple here at the weakest link. It will not crumple here. It's not going to, I don't care how much pressure is put on the lock. This is all thick all the way through. It will crumple at the weakest point. That's not debatable. It's not going to fail up here or down here. It will fail at the weakest point. He's saying that it will withstand more force before it fails at its weakest point than this will before it fails in the middle. So essentially, this is an exaggerated view of this lock, albeit the cutout is in the middle. You could flip it, cutout be on the outside, whatever. This is the exact same thickness as the cutout, as you can see. This is just balsa wood. Saying you're put compressional forces on this, so this is the lock bar here in the liner lock, and you're closing the blade on this. This is going to be fairly rigid because there's no predetermined weak point in this for it to fail. If it does fail and it does crumple, the way this is designed, since there is no cutout, it's actually bent and bowed in. It will bow outwards since it already has a bow built into it. It starts down here and it goes up. Granted, this is a predominantly straight line. The bow is down here. It will bow at its weakest point, which is the pre-stressed point, the part that it is bent at. It will bow there first, but the bow will continue up the lock bar and it will actually push against the G10. So the lock will never actually bow to the point that it moves out of the way of the blade. That's pretty much why this is called the fail-safe liner lock. It's if they're built right, it will not slip off the tang. Like he had mentioned that before it'll fail, it'll probably slip off the tang. Well, if they're built right, it won't slip off the tang, and that's the whole reason Bob Terzula deemed it the fail-safe liner lock, because it does have a fail-safe. If you put so much force on this lock that it fails, it will bow like this. It will bow in the way that it's predetermined. It's already bent that way. The liner will actually push and wedge itself against the G10, but the blade will not, it'll never move out of the way of the blade. I'm not going to say it won't close. That's depending on how much force there is. You could, of course, have so much force that it would completely break the liner, I guess, but that's you're not going to be doing that with your hands. You would have to have some kind of machine to do that. But the liner will bow and wedge itself against the G10. It's not going to bow this way because that's going against the way that it's already pre-stressed. It's not going to bow against something that's already pre-stressed. It's just not going to work that way. It will bow at the predetermined stress point, which is the bend, and it'll wedge itself against the G10. I think that this will withstand more than the frame lock since it doesn't have a predetermined weak point. It has a predetermined stress point at which it will bow, but it doesn't have a weak point. I think that given the same thickness, given that these are the same thickness, which they are, this would withstand more compressional force, and it'll actually bend like this and then bow at that point. It may bow in the middle. It may not bow down here. Let's just say it bows in the middle. It will still wedge itself against the G10. It has a surface to wedge itself against, but it still is in contact with the blade tang, if that makes sense. So given that it bows or breaks in the middle, it will still be wedged against the blade tang because it will stop. It will be stopped by the scale, which is my palm, and my finger is the blade tang. I believe that's what will happen with it. With a frame lock, let's just say this is the hinders, and again, this is greatly exaggerated, but it's probably not too far off from what this is right here. Say you have compressional forces on this. You're pushing, 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 pushing. It's going to fail at some point here, but it will fail where the cutout is. It's not going to fail up here. It's not going to fail here. It will fail at the predetermined weak point, and it will fail probably just like that, given that there is more thickness on this outer edge than the inner edge. When it starts to give, it's going to give in a manner like this. Now when it does do that, you've just rendered the lock useless because it's going to bow this way, given that the cutout is that way. So what have you done? It's either going to crumple and just fold in on itself, or it's going to bend and crumple and warp and push out to the side. So which one is going to last? Which one is going to last, and which one's going to fail and cut you? I don't know. I think that the liner lock will keep you safe. I don't want to say any of it safe, but I think the liner lock will wedge itself and not allow it to fold as much as the liner lock, the frame lock. The frame lock will crumple here at this point. It's either going to crumple or just break. It may stay in the way of the blade, it may not, but you don't have anything stopping it from going out other than a lock bar stabilizer. But if this is crumpled, then that's not going to be lined up anyway. So anyway, just my thoughts on it. I still think a liner lock is going to be stronger in a failure mode. I think failure mode, the liner lock will be stronger because it has something to be wedged against. Even if it does fail in the middle, it's going to bow out and wedge itself against the G10. So anyway, let me know your thoughts.